Welcome to the Chase Podcast. Dr. Ron Charles is a renowned archaeologist, author, historian, speaker, missionary, and is known as the Christian Indiana Jones. Dr. Charles has spent over 50 years researching and uncovering truths about Jesus Christ and information that proves the historical authenticity of the Bible. Gleaned from his years of tireless research, ministry, and archaeological work as the pages of the Bible come to life like never before. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and information about this global ministry.
Hello, I'm Dr. Ron Charles, and welcome to the program today. You know, when Jesus first began his earthly ministry, he did minister by himself for a while, but then he came to the conclusion that he needed some people to help him. Whether he anticipated having 12 or not, or whether he just let that number grow as he went, we don't really know. But we know that he began with Philip, and then Nathaniel, and then Peter and Andrew and James and John. And so Jesus felt like that he needed to train these guys. They were going to be helping him. They were going to be doing crowd control. They were going to be praying with him. They were going to be helping people that came to him who were sick, and they needed to be guided to him. And so there was various things that Jesus knew that these guys would be doing. And so he felt like that he needed to train them. He needed to train them in the things that were needed and were necessary for them to know, in helping him in his ministry and helping him in the things that he was doing for the people in the Galilee and then later in Judea and so forth. And so Jesus felt it mandatory for him to take these disciples aside and to instruct them in things that were necessary and things that were fundamental. And so he set aside a time to pull these guys together. And what is recorded in Matthew, the 5th and 6th, 7th chapter, was the teaching that he gave to these disciples before they were to go out with him and to minister. We call it the Sermon on the Mount. Whether it was done at a single setting or at a number of settings, we don't really know. But the teachings that is recorded in these 3 chapters is the teachings that he had for these disciples. You know, this teaching was not only relevant at that time for them, but it was also relevant for us today, Jesus' 21st century disciples. So if you consider yourself a disciple of Jesus, if you consider yourself one of those that works on his behalf, ministers on his behalf, teaches on his behalf here on this earth, then these particular set of rules, regulations, scenarios, and teachings is for you, just like it was for them. So we're not going to cover this whole set of teachings, but we are going to concentrate on a single one that's listed in Matthew, the 6th chapter, and it's verse number 22. And it says this: "The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single," and the word that's used for single is a word that we call today focused. So if your eye be focused, then your whole body will be focused or full of light. But if your eye be evil, then thine whole body shall be full of darkness. And if therefore the light that is in thee be darkness, how great is that darkness?" And so Jesus was telling his disciples, he says, "Gentlemen, you have to be focused. You can't be double-minded, and you can't be of a split opinion, or you can't be doing one thing and thinking something else, saying one thing and actually believing something else. You have to be focused. You have to be straightforward. But the word that Jesus used is, if thy eye be evil. The word evil that was translated evil is actually a Persian word. And the word is aporas, A-P-O-R-U-S-E, aporas. And it's a word that is military. And it has its origin all the way back to the days of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great had a company of fighters that he called his division of Apollus, and they were the most feared of any in the military by an enemy of Alexander, whether that enemy be the Persians, whether it be some other group that or country that was fighting Alexander. These were the most feared, more feared than the cavalry, more feared than the archers, more feared than the horsemen, the chariots. This Apollus was something that was unprecedented, and they were so fearful that usually whenever an army or a set of a military, a portion of the army came in contact with these guys, they would flee, run the opposite direction rather than stand there and try to fight them. And the reason for this is because of their specialty. Now, all of these guys were archers, and so they're the ones that would use the bow and the arrow. And what they did to their arrows is that they would, it wasn't unusual at that time that you would fire 2 and 3, sometimes 4 arrows at a time. And they were usually pretty accurate with these arrows and shooting them. But then the Apollus division, they would rip off the feather that was, or the controlling mechanism on the rear of the arrow. They would rip off the one that was on top. And then they would fire these 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 arrows at a time. And what would happen is that because of the feather or the controlling mechanism that was on the back had been removed, then the arrow was sporadic. And so if a bowman, an archer, was to pull his bow back and fire at a single individual, it doesn't necessarily mean that that individual is who was going to be hit, because the Apollus were specialties, or they specialized in this type of offense. They would actually fire, they would aim their arrow through their bow, they would aim it at an enemy that is directly in front of them. And that enemy that's directly in front of them would prepare. They prepare to receive the arrow, or prepare to receive the missile that was fired at them with the bow. And they would either raise their shield, or they would get out of the way, or they would stoop down and lay on the ground, or something like that. And they would have somewhat of a foreknowledge of protection or defense against this archer who was shooting the arrow at them. But in the Apollus, you didn't have that, because once the arrow was aimed and the arrow's released, it doesn't necessarily mean that the one that's being fired at is the one that's going to be hit. Because when those arrows leave the bowstring, they go crazy. And because of the control mechanism on the back of the arrow that was now removed, then that arrow would go a number of different directions. And so you could be aiming at this person, and when you release the arrows, a person way over here was the one that shot. And he's the one that would receive the maximum penalty, so to speak, from those arrows. Or the one directly in front, he could receive one of those arrows, but the other 2 or the other 3 would go someplace else and hit someone else. And so there was no defense against this. And this was the most feared aspect of Alexander's army because you couldn't prepare for it. The archers would aim, and they had no idea. The enemy had no idea where the arrow was going to hit. It very well could hit the person that it's aiming at, but then there again, maybe not. It might hit someplace else and do some damage someplace else. As a matter of fact, there are occasions that they would shoot the arrow at the enemy, and it would end up shooting the horses or the animals that they were riding of the enemy, and they weren't even aiming at them. And so it was a very fearful thing to come in contact with these Aporus companies, and so fearful that, as I said before, many times when the enemies of Alexander's army came face to face with the Aporus company, rather than standing to fight them, and rather than standing there to try to defend their ground that Alexander was trying to take, they would actually literally turn tail and run, because you couldn't trust the Aporus on where their fight was going to be taken and where it was going to be given. So they chose instead just to give ground to Alexander's forces and maybe wait for another day to face another part of the army, one that could be certainly could be relied upon to attack in a way that's historically had been the way it's been for years. Cavalry against cavalry, swordsman against swordsman, and so forth. And so Jesus was telling his disciples, he says, you must be focused on what you're doing. If you're going to work for me, and if you're going to minister for me, if you are going to follow me and be my servants, be my disciples, be my helpers, then you are going to have to be focused. You're going to have to present the same message that I present. You're going to have to present the same message of hope that I give, the same message of faith that I give, the same assurances, the same confidences that I give, and not give the people an opportunity to see a unfocused approach from you, my disciples. You cannot be a porous. You cannot look like you have one directive, doing one thing, but in reality, underneath, your agendas are divided between 2, 3, and 4 different directions. Because if you do that, rather than helping people, the person or the thing or the opportunity that you have to help that person, and you're not focused on that, but you're divided instead, then your suggestion and your purposes and your help is going to go haywire. It's not going to be helpful to the people at all. And as a matter of fact, not only will it not be helpful to them, it could be death to the other people, and certainly hurtful to the other people, because they can be blindsided by something that you say, something that you do that is so offensive to them that they lose their faith in God. They lose their faith in what I am teaching them, what I'm saying. And so you cannot be a porous. And when I was reading and doing study here about on the Sermon on the Mount, and I came to this verse and I just shook my head and I said, what in the world is Jesus talking about? How can he be talking about these things that are relevant to his disciples and then now all of a sudden use a military term? And not only a military term in essence that could be adapted, but a military term that was used by Alexander the Great, and that all the military people in the world knew exactly what it was all about. What does that have to do with Jesus' disciples? What did it have to do with Jesus' training of these disciples to help people? And then finally, I got it. Jesus was using the actual physical event of the company of the Apollos and their reputation with Jesus's disciples and what could be their mode of operation. He says, do not be divided. Be focused. You follow me. Do the things that I do. Say the things that I say. Continue with the same line of questioning, same thought patterns, the same direction that I am going and that I am doing, and you will be just fine. But when you approach it as a porous, then you will approach it with an attitude that is not consistent with confidence. It's not consistent with you knowing that you know that you know, and especially not with the confidence in knowing that what I am saying is correct and what I'm doing is helpful to you. So do not be a porous. Be focused. Go directly to the person's hurt. Go directly to their need. Go directly to what they need in their life, what they need right then physically, and meet that need. You know, I liked Francis Schaeffer's definition of love. Francis Schaeffer said, love is this: meeting a person at their point of need, regardless of what that need may be. And I think that Francis Schaeffer had an insight in what Jesus was trying to say. What he was trying to say to his disciples, he says, this is what you do. We meet the person at their point of need, regardless of what that need may be. Not as a porous, not as we meet your need as one of many. Because if we approach it that way, then we very likely are going to hurt somebody. Because the attention will not be directed to the need, and we will not be meeting that person's need, regardless of what the need may be. We'll be dividing our efforts, and we'll be dividing our responsibilities at that time. Do not be a porous. Do not be that person that fires in all different directions, because you will eventually hurt not only the person that you're aiming at, but also others that may be innocent. And so from the very beginning, Jesus was telling his disciples, just pay attention. Don't put too much on your plate that you can't minister to the ones that need the most help, the ones that I'm directing you to minister to, that I'm telling you to minister to, and the ones that are right in front of you. Help them and minister to them and meet their needs. And so when Jesus' disciples then began to help him, then this is one of the things that was characteristic of their ministry with him. Other disciples of other rabbis, of other teachers, of other traveling evangelists, so to speak, most all of them had their own helpers and people that followed them. But many times the teaching to these people were this, that yes, you do what your teacher tells you to do, but then in addition to that, you help those that you feel like that you want to help, regardless of whether your master tells you to or not. Jesus said, no, don't do that. So it's totally contrary to what was being done in the religious community of the Jews at that time. Jesus pulled it back in. He says, you can do nothing without me. I'm your master. You must follow me. You must follow my lead. And do not be carried away with trying to meet needs of things that you feel like you can do. No, follow me. Follow my direction. Yes, you will see people with needs. Yes, you will see opportunities that you feel like you can meet and you can satisfy that need in that opportunity, but don't do it. Be focused. Be focused on the same thing that I am focused on. You adhere to my teachings. You continue to you continue to capitalize on my teachings. You share those teachings, what I say, with other people. You try to reinforce what I'm saying to these people. You reinforce the healings that I am giving to these people. You are there to give them support and to give them help as an aftermath of the healings that they receive. Then you continue to help them in that regard. I am your leader. I am your teacher. And you must follow my directive. You must follow my teaching and follow my example that I am presenting to you. Now, this still holds true today. You know, our ministry in the Islamic world for the past 30 plus years has been an eye-opener, to say the least. You can look around and you can see 100 different directions you can turn, different places that have different needs, different opportunities that have different emphasis that you can be involved with. But what we have found out through this ministry is that God does have a plan. God does have a will and a way to fulfill that plan. And that plan may not be towards the greatest need. It may not be towards the obvious scenario or the obvious 1, 2, 3, 4 steps, because we must follow Him, must follow the leading of the Holy Spirit, especially in these Islamic countries where anything could happen. The whole world could explode and disintegrate around us within a 24-hour period. And so we have no choice. We have to be totally and completely tuned in to what the Lord wants, to what Jesus wants for these people right now. We cannot be unfocused. We have to have that direct line. We have to have that focused attempts and that focused mentality. And we have to be in that position of a person that is focused in what we do, and certainly not a porous. Even though the needs are there, the needs are obvious, the opportunities are obvious, we can't follow those paths. We can only follow and must only follow the path that Jesus lays out, because if we don't, then more harm will be than good. And so just remember that you are His 20th century disciples. And just like these disciples received this teaching, this same teaching is for you. This same teaching is relevant for you, a disciple of Jesus, right now on this day. Determine what God's will is. Determine what directive that Jesus has presented, what direction He wants you to follow, and then follow that direction. And resist the opportunity and resist the desire to be the porous. Resist that and totally and completely rely upon the leadership of the Holy Spirit, and there's no way you can go wrong. The Lord bless you.
Welcome to Canaan, a small indigenous community here on the west coast of Colombia. In recent years, Canaan has grown tremendously. The people here have a heart for God and for sharing His love. This is where the Cubit Foundation does their work. Over the years, Cubit has worked on developing the community in many ways, and by doing so, they've developed personal relationships and bonds that will last a lifetime.
Cuando viene cualquier persona del extranjero, pues lo recibimos con mucho amor, recibimos con mucho aprecio, con mucho afecto, porque sabiendo que si esta persona vive tan lejos, no nos conoce y nos viene a visitar, eso para nosotros es muy satisfactorio y toca mi corazón de una manera especial.
Brad Charles is one of the leaders behind Cubit and their work in Canaan, Colombia. His passion is for helping people in need around the world and doing God's work out here on the mission field. The Cubit Foundation has done some incredible work here thus far, and God's presence is truly evident. Partnerships with local Colombian churches, Cubit has taken part in service to the village of Canaan. And with your help, Cubit will continue to serve them and many more around the world.
When people give to Cubit, I want them to go. I want them to go with me. And I want them to experience this.
Lo imposible para el hombre es posible para Dios.
To find out more and to become a part of what Cubit is doing here in Colombia, log on to cubitfoundation.org. That's cubitfoundation.org.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ron Charles of the Cubit Foundation. You know, we've been in Middle East for going on 30 years. And I would love to come to your church or your meeting to let you know what's happening in reality in the Middle East. And we'd love to come there and let you know what's happening, what the Lord's doing in that part of the world. So if you can contact us at thecubitfoundation.org, then we could come to your place. If you would like to find out more about us, then go to www.cubitfoundation.org. Thank you.
The Chase with Dr. Ron Charles is sponsored by supporters of the Cubit Foundation. Visit cubitfoundation.org for Dr. Ron's books and discover how you can support this global ministry.